Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. I'm very excited to share the story of the Silk Road. As Seville had mentioned, the first part of this four-part series was around May, June, and it focused on the flora and the fauna of the Silk Road. Today, the focus is luxury textiles. And the birth of Venus, very recognizable from the Uffizi Gallery. What I would like to take away is that the naked human body is an animal body, and we have always sought to adorn it. The adornment of body paint in Brazil or Africa, adornment is a form of identity. And likewise, textiles communicate identity. Through the textiles, we project our culture, our gender, our status. And as a symbol of power, status, and wealth, luxury has always driven cultures and economies. Much more than mere clothing, luxury textiles, sybaritic and opulent, are all about pleasure and wealth. The Nourishment Project, as Civil very kindly alerted us, is really about encouraging curiosity, and it pivots around scholarship. Here are some of the references that informs this presentation, and if anyone would like it, please send me an email. I'll happily forward it to you. In our last presentation, we had covered the flora and the fauna of the Silk Road. The dagger-shaped tulips that come from the regions of Turkey is evident in the picture on the right. And the painting on the left depicts perhaps a love-struck, like an absolutely love-struck Ottoman signaling to his beloved by the color of his flower that he'll probably tuck into his turban, that he's on fire with her beauty, and the flower's black base is his heart burned to coal. That's typically the poetry that suffuses the Central Asian culture. And this level of poetry, as Roya was mentioning, Hafiz, Rumi, Tabriz, all of them, shows up in the craftsmanship, the needlework that exists in their textiles. Suzan is the Persian word for needle. And so Suzani, stitching, is embroidery work. It's found throughout Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, centuries-old customs. And it's found today, even now, if you go to the Central Asian markets. And you shall also find them in the 2015 Valentino collection, the Central Asian Suzani-inspired collection that is evident here. And along with the tulip in the needlework, we see the pomegranate, the Middle Eastern symbol for prosperity and fertility. Here again, we see the dagger-shaped Turkish tulips in this year's 2020 Spring-Summer Armani collection. And the brightly colored skirt on the right shows another Silk Road import, ikat design. It's ikat weaving. The term ikat etymologically comes from the Malaysian word mengikat, which means to dye. So it's effectively tie-dye. So the Silk Road transmits stories, motifs, artistic styles, and design technologies such as ikat weaving. As Seville had pointed out, the Silk Road has a very long heritage. Our narration timeline is going to start around 30 BCE, BCE being nowadays it's called before current era. So it's around 30 BCE, around this time, Rome has captured Egypt. And it's the wealth of the Nile, the bounteous Nile, and the Egyptian taxes that allows citizens in Rome to have money for effectively conspicuous consumption. And one way of flaunting wealth, if one must flaunt wealth, is through luxury textiles. So our story is going to progress about 18 centuries in 50 minutes, so buckle up. As Seville had pointed out, Silk Roads are trade networks, and they span millennia. Trade implies commerce, so the Silk Roads had a substantial economic impact, and that is the focus of today's presentation. As pointed out by Seville very astutely, the Silk Road has expanded beyond the roads from China to Anatolia. Right now, the Belt and Road Initiative that she had mentioned, China's almost $1 trillion infrastructure investment, encompasses everything. Trade routes are land, sea, air, and absolutely digital. Any one of us who's involved with online shopping are already participating in the Silk Road. So silk is effectively just one brand of the Silk Road, the brand of the Silk Road. So what is this lustrous and sensual fiber that is interwoven into the loom of our humanity? Silk shows up everywhere. Well, voila. These flightless, sightless worms, silkworms, have a voracious appetite and they love mulberry. So when they eat a lot, and they eat, that's all they do, the cocoons produce a fiber that becomes silk. Silk fibers have a molecular triangular pattern. And so this prism structure refracts light. And that is why silk has a pearly sheen. There's a lot of geometry and the physics behind it that gives this, it's a particular luster. And the cocoons are the heart of the story of silk. So the silkworm, this is obviously a photo op because the worms would be inside the cocoon and not outside. Eventually, they nibble their way out of the structure and fly off as a moth. Silk is a natural fiber. So because it lived once and breathed once, when you hold silk, it's soft as a whisper. And if you feel it caress your skin, I always recommend like bury your face in it and breathe it in. It's just so fabulous. So let's start around 30 BCE. And around this point, remember, Rome has become rich. And upon introduction to silk, the Roman citizens are absolutely enthralled by silk, the most exotic and erotic of textiles. We see here the copy of the book by Pliny the Elder in his Naturalis Historia. He had documented his resentment at the extravagant sum. 10% of the Roman budget was being spent on acquiring silk, to acquire this luxury good simply so that the good Roman lady can shimmer in public. He just was absolutely aghast. And if we now leap forward to the 6th century, and I would like to thank, this is photography. The Nourishment Project is peer-to-peer learning. And I love it when people engage and tell me stories. I try to build it into the narrative. These photographs are from Susan Haynes. She's a magnificent photographer. If you have not seen her website, where she documents her travel, please do. You're in for a treat. So the 6th century is a seminal year for silk. We see here the mosaics. This is Emperor Justinian, and look at Ravenna, Italy. It's just mesmerizing, eye-wateringly beautiful. The Byzantine, which is the Eastern Roman Empire, like I said, Emperor Justinian is ruling, and the Chinese up to this point has guarded sericulture, which is silk farming, as a state secret. But finally, we have espionage because two Nestorian monks have managed to hide silkworms in the hollow of their canes and brought it all the way from China to Italy. It was a 2-year journey, and somehow these Adam and Eve of silkworms starts the new lucrative industry in Europe. In this same century, there was a lot going on in the 6th century. This painting depicts, and I've zoomed in and focused on the high official, Chinese official that is depicted in the red clothing and the ermine jacket draped across his shoulder. And if you are going to be painted, because back then there was no photography, you're going to put your best foot forward. The reason I'm showing this, if you see him holding a cup of tea, because I had covered the story of tea, it will remind us that China, who was then even very wealthy in natural resources. They barely needed anything for trade during the Silk Road. The only things that they pretty much traded for was silver and some small side items. The tea trade with China, the only land trade for that was with Russia. And with Russia, they traded for pelts. And so we can surmise with some level of certainty that this ermine that this official is wearing draped across his shoulder probably came from a trade with China. And ermines and royalty have a lasting bond over centuries. And this century, the 6th century, is also the birth of Islam. And so we now proceed to the 8th through the 13th century and the Abbasid Caliphate, an immensely powerful empire. And the capital of the Abbasids were Baghdad. It needs to be pointed out, back then, the wealth of the Abbasid Caliphate was staggering, and Paris used to be known at some point as the Baghdad of the West. And luxury textiles, our focus for today, contributed to the wealth of the Islamic dynasties. Let's get dazzled. Keep in mind, since there were no photography, the best way that we access all this is through paintings and stories and books. This painting is showing, it's from the 10th century, depicts a reception in Baghdad. So luxury textiles convey power. They have rolled out the carpet for the Byzantine ambassador. And this extravaganza has been orchestrated to impress and overwhelm the Byzantine embassy with Abbasid opulence. Allowing for some exaggeration, documents show that there were 22,000 carpets, 38,000 wall hangings, nothing in 110 numbers, curtains brocaded with threads of gold, and as evident in the picture, carpets from the gate right up to where the caliph is seated. And near him, when you approach the caliph, the finest of rugs are laid out over the carpets. And the shimmer of silk carpets is mesmerizing. And the feeling is, I'm sure you felt it, it's incredible. I mean, if you take your shoes off and make contact with the silk carpets, the only thing that I could possibly convey is, have you seen dogs rolling around in fresh cut grass? They're just rolling around in ecstasy. That's what I think of silk carpets, the texture of decadence. It's magnificent. And even in recent times, the Moroccan kings display red carpets to welcome dignitaries. And so this is where the concept of our celebrity red carpets come from. We roll out the carpets to welcome someone with respect and dignity. So the Silk Road influence surrounds us constantly. Once again, through paintings, we convey the importance and the history. And this one is very telling. This is now we've come to, I believe this one is around 16th century. And this is the newly enthroned Ottoman Emperor Murad III. So little history, and I love being able to present to the IWA members because you will know the geography so well. And I'm thrilled that we have someone from Turkey presenting here. You have a magnificent culture. It's a pleasure. And to have Persia represented here and Italy, it's a joy. I hope I do your country justice because I admire it so. So the Safavids are the Persians or the Iranians, is very, very different from the Ottoman, which is the Turkish Empire. In the picture on the top right, you see bowing deeply in the yellow kaftan is a man. He is representing the Safavid ambassador, bowing to the newly enthroned Murad III, the Ottoman Empire. Now, in those days, and sometimes it's also probably true now, I just marvel at looking at that picture. The gift you give marks your own prestige. So the gifts given to the Ottomans from the Safavids are staggering. The Safavid gifts include, among other things, as has been documented, silk tents embellished with diamonds, gold tents with gold tent poles. I think it was 40 chests of gemstones, silk textiles, silk carpets, and a Quran. I would love to see that Quran. Susan McCormick, an IWM member, I don't know if she's here. Susan, if you go to the Walter Museum or any of you go to the Walter Museum in Baltimore, it's all online. They have copies of the Quran that have 4-edge bindings. It is, I salivate over this stuff. I suspect the Quran referred to here is probably the Rusbian Quran that is found in the Chester Beatty Library in Ireland. You can look it up. It's gorgeous. If that doesn't make you become even more literate and book lover, I don't know what will. So in the bottom right, we see men draped across their shoulders like a snake. They're carrying carpets and undisputed luxury textiles, industry unto itself. And carpets and carpet making and this carpet making is very instructive. So textiles drove economies. And carpet production is an immense, complex enterprise. You know, you need specialized labor. Both men and women were in the workforce, and it was a completely organized social structure. So you have lots of choices to make. So is the cotton, is it going to be plant-based or animal-based? So if it's plant-based, is it cotton or linen? If it's animal-based, is it wool or silk? And cotton doesn't dye as well as silk. And so you have to transfer the fiber into a yarn, make vibrant color dyes, and dyes are very expensive. And it's also very telling because in these areas of Asia, colors are magnificent. Islam's idea of paradise is a garden. And so that is why they depict flowers throughout their work. It is them evoking the visuals of the Islamic paradise. And so as far as the economy and the industry is concerned, so you have to design the patterns, you have to attach patterns to the loom, weavers are employed, draw boys are engaged, people for folding, people for packing, distributing, selling, the entire supply chain. That's the right term for this. It is a huge industry. I mean, look at that. Don't you want to be there and hear the bustle of this market? It's beautiful. No online shopping for me. And here is the Carpet Museum in Baku, Azerbaijan. Once again, Susan Haynes. I learned this from your website. Look, architecturally, it's shaped as a rolled up carpet. Isn't that fantastic? So we come into the 10th century and the Arabs control Byzantine Sicily. And after the Norman conquest in the 11th century, Sicily becomes Christian. And there are Islamic weavers who are established there. And this spectacular mantle made in around 1133 is embroidered with threads of gold on crimson silk. And you know, the symbolism is just hits you over the head. Richard the Lion-Hearted, the lion and the unicorn, the symbolism of lion associated with the West is obvious. And so when you see a lion attacking a desert camel, the message given isn't at all subtle about who won at that time. Weighing about 110 pounds. Can you imagine wearing this? It's the coronation robe of the Holy Roman Empire, and it's currently housed in the museum in Vienna. And I'm going to zoom in for this one. I hope you can see. There are double bands of pearls, but more telling to me is the tiraz, the inscription in Islamic that borders this mantle. Effectively, that tiraz is a made-in label. It is telling in Islamic calligraphy which factory it was made in, when it was made, all of the information about its production. What I absolutely love and can't stress enough is the Islamic calligraphy commissioned on a Christian textile symbolizes for me the adoption of Islamic aesthetics by the Christian Normans. I absolutely love it. It embodies the ethos of IWA, that this marriage of cultures, it is a celebration of humanity. I find that marvelously in textiles, in everything that we are wearing even now. It really is a sense of identity. Prepare to be dazzled. We talked of carpets, and now look what a tent is. Tents were also, along with carpets, an undisputed luxury textiles. Doesn't it bring to your mind, don't you want to see that diamond encrusted tent that was gifted to Murad III from the Safavids? This is not something I see at REI. Well, here is one. Here is another example of tents, and there were many. Tents were symbols of royal authority, and so they were used during military campaigns, for travel, for imperial ceremonies, all over. And the magnificent woven textiles has applique work that is just gorgeous. And these are all handmade. This is not machine made. And they're designed to evoke the lush gardens that symbolizes paradise in the Islamic world. We have more of them. Well, from here we can see that I think Harun al-Rashid was reported to have about 4,000 ceremonial tents, 15,000 camping tents. I'd be happy with one of them. But they didn't just restrict the luxury textiles to humans. The beloved horses from these areas were adorned in velvet and gems. The applique work done in some of these are pure artistry. And people wore jeweled turbans. If you were royalty, you had jewels in your turbans, and they had brocaded shoes lined with velvet. It is through textiles that the exotic Orient blooms. And into this 11th century world comes the first of 5 crusades. And this bejeweled embroidery captures the East versus West beautifully. So a little backstory. Realize in the 11th century, the proverbial Silk Roads were very well established on lands. So there were merchants traveling all the way, as Seville said, from China all the way. And hardly anyone traveled all the way from China to Anatolia. There was always stopover village points all the way across. But throughout, they had these caravanserais in the Silk Road routes where people could stop, sleep over, trade stories, sitting around the campfire, singing songs, telling stories. And they had access to fresh, clean drinking water. All of that matters because during the same time, parts of Europe were filthy, castles were stony, primitive plumbing, even in the best of castles. And in London, which was almost a backwater back then, it was a European backwater then, it hadn't come into the power and the wonder it is now. People were plodding through probably ankle deep slop. So what happens when these Western European soldiers, not accustomed to splendor, encounter effectively refinement? I always marvel, did they have the capacity to recognize what they're beholding? Plunders from Jerusalem during the Crusades were sent as tributes to the Catholic Church. And textiles are tributes, luxury textiles, the symbol of power, is a tribute. And ironically, some of the best Islamic textiles are preserved in churches because when they brought them, they were given to the Catholic Church, the alpha dog of all of them. And many of the Christian relics are wrapped in Islamic textiles. The obvious low-hanging fruit irony is that the Christian saints are wrapped in the cloths of the Islamic saints, so whom they are fighting, they are venerating in their church. But the more bigger irony also, the more subtle one in the back, it's because these textiles were preserved so lovingly in the Christian crypts that we see some of them, because otherwise in the dampness and in the political situations, many textiles don't survive because sometimes it's just a need. When you have cloth that's made of threads of gold, oftentimes they were melted down to get access to the wealth. For example, in Egypt, the Fatimid dynasty, due to a drought, they needed access to wealth. They melted the gold, so all the work would have been gone. So it's a blessing that these Islamic textiles survived under Christian care. What we see here, the linens have roundels, which I have zoomed in and highlighted in the inbox, and they have identical tripartite bands on the two extremes. Among other things, I'm trying to avoid using this marker. Here again is the tiraz that says effectively made in label, where it was made, when it was made. And to untrained Christian eye, it is simply decoration. So this is tiraz with gold on linen and silk. So we have linens from Egypt. All of this is being traded. Now, Islam does not figuratively represent their God Allah. And it's the religion of Islam is depicted magnificently in the beautiful Islamic calligraphy. And it symbolizes the geometry of the soul as far as I'm concerned. And it is understandable when the soldiers saw the textiles, they would only see the beauty and not the spirit. And for the longest of time, that textiles we just saw was known as the veil of Saint Anne, who is the grandmother of Jesus Christ. So Saint Anne is represented in paintings by the color green. And the reliquary, the veil of Saint Anne, is right now ceremonially displayed once a year. It's in Apt, France. It's all reverence. It's all wonderful. Another example of Islamic adoption of Christian attire is this Eastern Orthodox cape. I was trying to figure out, is it cope or cape? I think it's cape. Russian embroidery on top. And the weave pattern, as we see on the left-hand side of the picture, on this beautiful cream velvet, is that of the Persian poet Nizam's story of Layla and Majnun, a doomed love story akin to Romeo and Juliet. Here I have once again zoomed in on one section. We see the lovelorn Majnun being comforted by wild animals. Now you put it on a bigger picture, on a holistic view, when the Christian priest is wearing this, facing the altar, and the parishioners behold the image on his back, they are probably evoking the story of Saint Francis of Assisi, who too loved his animals. It all evokes a reverence, all goes to the higher spirit. It's all fun and good. Now the first crusade is over and we are in the 13th century, and the Bishop of Accra, the good bishop, has written Historia Naturalis, Historia Naturalis was Pliny the Elder, and he is not happy with the children of the second generation of the Crusaders who settled into these areas in the Holy Land. He's scathing in his reviews. He's saying, These crusaders' children, who are called Pulani, are brought up in luxury, soft and effeminate, more used to baths than battles, clad like women in soft clothes, ornamented and polished corners of the temple. He is not at all happy. Needless to say, he didn't last in Accra too long. Those of you who are music lovers, I suspect there are many, I believe it's his work that also shows up in the music, the um, ancient music, early music of Guillaume de Machaut, very beautiful chant music. It's really nice. So even though he's scathing here, there's a lot of beauty in what he does. The passion of the crusade continues, and I marvel at his ambition and his pluck. This is showing Saint Francis trying to convert the nephew of Saladin into Christianity. That, hats off, because Saladin was the Muslim leader fighting the Christian kings during the crusade. So he is ambitious. Obviously, he didn't win in that one. And here is the Islamic controlled powerhouse Al-Andalus, what we know as Andalusia, Spain. And the magnificence of the Alhambra renders one speechless. The geometrical patterns of Islamic art is evident in architecture and textiles. And these that you see on the left, you see a picture from the Hall of the Ambassadors in Alhambra. The work you see in the architecture is mimicked in the textiles we see on the right-hand side, which can be seen. These textiles are in New York with the Hispanic Society of America. I marvel at the beauty that comes through humanity. Into this 13th century appears the Mongol. We may know him as Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan. And what is the hipster word now? Disruptor? Well, he would be an ultimate disruptor because he rides into history out of the Himalayan steppes, and disrupt he does. He unifies the entire Mongol Empire, and it is something to say he unified all these areas, decimates Song culture in China. That's the only part of this history I do not like, because I revere the Song culture. I mean, Tang and Ming and all of that is really nice. There is no comparison, but I revere the refinement that's found in the Song dynasty. It is sublime. Well, he destroys them, decimates all of that, unifies the Mongols, and makes the largest land empire in the history of existence, larger than the British Empire, is second only to power to the British Empire. Roman Empire doesn't even come close to this, but the massive amount of land he covered, the Mongols covered, is fantastic. He does it with his grandsons, Kublai Khan and Hulegu. And speaking of the Romans, Augustus Caesar, I believe, had once commented, he found Rome in bricks and he left it in marble. Some sly historian had snidely documented that Genghis Khan began the Mongol dynasty wearing the furs of mice and dogs. I doubt it. And he ended up in silk and gold. Well, shown in this painting gives you proof that once introduced to refinement and culture from the Song dynasty, the Mongols develop a rapacious appetite for luxury. Look at the transformation of Genghis Khan in silken splendor. How does this apply to everyday life? Well, the Mongols lived, because they were nomadic, they lived in yurts. And the difference between a yurt and a ger, G-E-R, is that the ger has poles. The yurts are built, the outside lattice structure is a yurt. An easy way of saying, otherwise they're very similar. So the yurts, people are living in these round dwellings, and the insides are covered with pelts to provide warmth in the Himalayan steppes. Very soon, upon being introduced to the decadence of silk, the inside of the yurts are now covered in gorgeous silk tapestry weaving. And I'm going to focus and zoom in on one of these roundels that we see in the same roundel patterns that we had seen in the Whale of St. Anne. You must forgive that because of the time, what is gold looks brown here, but this artistry, this, I don't know, common patterns of roundel that shows up till the 13th century in the artistry. This is one more thing that the Mongol Empire definitely affected by their existence. Am I good with time? Yeah. Okay. So between 13th and the 15th centuries, the Mongols conquered land all the way from Korea to the edge of Anatolia, Turkey. And the eastern side is under the Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, and that area is in China, the Yuan dynasty. And on the west, which is Iran, Iraq, all of them, all the way to Western Pakistan, is the Il Khanate, which means the little Khan, and he's little only by the size of his empire, which is Hulegu, Chenghis's other grandson. Between the two of them, they cover the entire landmass. Now, at this time, the Fifth Crusade has ended, and because of the Crusades, the Arabs had shut down the Silk Road routes. There was not trade going on. And there was a tremendous loss of money, and the traders, in turn, were very happy when the Mongol Empire is established, because what the Mongols do is they establish what's called Pax Mongolica, similar in concept as Pax Romana. So it's a very great piece that they allow travelers to go, especially traders, back and forth. And so trade starts booming. And it is under this Pax Mongolica that there is a Marco Polo who travels from Italy all the way back from China and brings to his Italian city-state of Venice trade goodies. Now, it's true Mongols butchered their enemies by the millions, but because they loved luxury and resplendence, they spared the lives of artisans and weavers and considered them war goods. And they distributed the artisans, like here, I conquered this group, killed 60,000 people and spared 50 weavers because there was a value to them. Who is this Admit? Okay. And depending on the need, the artisans got resettled back. So we have evidence of weavers from the Chinese area repopulated in the areas of West. Do I have to do Admit? I guess I do.
No, I'm doing it.
So all right. Sorry. Thank you, Nicola. And how does that affect, sorry, it took me a second to come back. And how is this showing up in luxury textiles, these redistribution of artisans? This Iranian painting, it's called An Attempted Murder Frustrated. I will request that you look at the brown quilt. If you look in there, you shall see these blue curlicue Chinese clouds. They're distinct looking. I'm going to point to it with my cursor. Here is evident of the work of the Chinese artisans that had been redistributed by the Mongols. It shows up in the painting and the weaving in Iran, Iraq, in these areas. And so this is how, by redistribution of artisans, and they went back and forth all the time, depending on, I need a new outfit. Brother Hulegu, send me some weavers. That's exactly what happened. This is how the Silk Road transmits culture and artistic style through politics and trade. Examples galore, the effects of the Silk Road and the effects of the Mongol on the Silk Road and style. The Islamic robe up to this point, the kaftan, would have been sealed in the center. They were traditionally closed through the center, in the front. After the Mongol design implement, they are closed on the side, because if you're riding horses, because horses are what was central to the success of the Mongols, they were brilliant horsemen and archers, you want to protect your chest as much as possible. And so they had it tied on the side. This one also, looks brown now, it would have been gold, threads of gold doing all the embroidery. In its heyday, it was probably, although I find it still striking, it would have been dazzling. Tents too, the other luxury textiles, are affected by the disruption by the Mongols. So this tent decoration is no longer the roundel patterns that we saw before. The previous silk birds that we saw in the inside of the yurts have now been replaced by the Chinese influence of nature, because the Song culture loved nature. It shows up in the Mughal tent ceiling. Sorry, not the Mughals, the Mongols. Well, Mughal is okay. The Mughals of India, the term Mughal comes from, it's a butchered version of the term Mongols. What I'm seeing in here is the great Khan sitting in the middle, enthroned in the center, and the turbaned Middle East and the Chinese paying obeisance to him. And the embroidery is fabulous. I mean, it's undeniable. Nature blooms, turtles, foxes, birds, paradise depicted. Now, historically, the Mongols were animists. They were pretty much believe in the supernatural. Hulegu, who ruled the Ilkhanate, and they were quite open to what you would say, very embracing of every culture. His wife was a Nestorian Christian. Over time, his grandson, I think it was great grandson actually, so Hulegu's great grandson, Ghazan, converted to Islam. And through that one act, he helped spread Islam through all these regions that are covered by the Ilkhanate area. So Iran, Iraq, all the way to Pakistan, all these areas became more Islamic through the conversion that had happened with Ghazan. It helped spread Islam throughout. So nothing stops in any one area. So while the Mongols are there on the western edge, Italy is doing magnificently. So in the 14th, 15th century, they dominate, the Italian merchants dominate the Mediterranean. And under the Mongol rule, Pax Mongolica, Silk Road has opened up again and their trade bustles. In this painting, the East is represented in the turbans. And I'm suspecting this is showing what it looks like to me is Piazza San Marco. And because I'm a dog lover, my favorite thing in this painting is that gorgeous, what looks like Italian hound right up front, sitting with such grace. Look at that thing. I love it. I also like Italian craftsmanship. It's, how could you not? I mean, look at this. Their expert craftsmanship shines in these textiles. The embroidery is remarkable. Perhaps this one, at least to me, it looks like it's telling a story of conquest and adventure. The medallion above the arrow, above the elbow, to me depicts the Italian merchants' vessels returning home, probably with like, untold wealth and just luxury goods. And as I had gently indicated before, in the carpets that were made, color mattered. Dye costs are high. It was almost a quarter of the cost of the garment, let alone carpets. And to make dye was an art form. Dye was a huge industry, essential to luxury textiles. So unlike cellulose fiber, and cellulose, the easy way to remember it is carbohydrate. So things that are plant are cellulose fibers. So cotton and linen are cellulose. Cellulose fibers don't really soak in dye very well. Silk does. Silk absorbs dye brilliantly. So just as an example, how do we make the color pink? Not from anything else, but saffron could be used, but since saffron is one of the most expensive items in the world, even now, real saffron, they used a poor man's compromise, which is safflower. It's a flower from the daisy family, and it's a mild alternative to saffron. So what they do is it uses saffron. I tried to just show you a picture. It converts saffron, the color, the dye is made pink using safflower. And there were other dyes used like this. So ultramarine, the lapis lazuli comes from ultramarine, and the mines are in Afghanistan. And I suggest next time you go to a museum, try to look at your favorite Renaissance painting from the point of view of color, because the Renaissance artists did not buy paint in, Hobby Lobby. They had a whole slew of artists who sat there, and it was a trade secret, each of the artist atelier houses. How do you make paint? So when you see paintings of Mother Mary, whose color is blue, the ultramarine in her cape, it is staggeringly expensive. It's kind of interesting to just watch a painting and look at it in terms of the cost of creating that beautiful piece of, I don't want to just call it art, it's something else. It's profoundly moving. And also the purple, the color purple. Why is it that the color purple is a sign of royalty and regality, not just in Europe, but also Japan? It is the regal color because it's exorbitantly expensive, because Tyrian purple comes from marine snails. You have to have thousands of marine snail and you boil them. I don't know for sure, but I've heard it stinks. But I don't want to know how to make it. I just know the color is magnificent. One doesn't have to lay an egg to enjoy an omelette, do we? So back to the textiles, the workmanship of this level I feel, deserves more attention that is given to them. And we're going to focus now, the story is moving into Italy. In the 14th century, the town of Lucca, which is in this map, it would be near Livorno. I'm going to point to it. It would be somewhere right around here. is the center of silk weaving. Because remember, the Nestorian monks had brought the silk, then the sericulture had started around the 6th century in Italy. And the clever rulers of Florence gave tax incentive, you see how that still happens now, to have the weavers bring their craftsmanship to the Florentine city-state. Remember at that time, Italy is not a unified country, it's wealthy city-states cobbled together. And the noble families of Florence, like the Puccis, supported 15th century silk industry, and they encouraged artisans to move. So north of Italy, north of Milan, which is the Como region, is known for wool, at least was known for wool dyeing, because the waters of the lake is ideal for dyeing industry. And the wool came from Scotland. They used to travel down Europe, hopped over the Switzerland and the Alps. But turf battles were always an issue, and the supply routes often got disrupted. Loro Piana, they're based out of these areas up north. I think they're out of Quarona, Italy. So all that region is very familiar with warm textiles. So anyway, turf battle ensues, and it stopped wool import, which is problematic for Como. So the Duke of Sforza, and this is what I think is the actual, to me, it's just a private joke of mine, this is the real Sforza del Destino, that opera. He had the foresight to sit there and plant thousands of mulberry trees in Como, which came in very handy because very soon this move by the Duke of Sforza has helped establish Como as a dominance in the Italian silk markets. So even now, from the 15th century, the Pucci family apparently has some of the looms they used to use. And so when I see, knowing this, when I see the works by, say, Pucci, and then later we'll find Hermes, their heritage is marvelous. It's a magnificent capture of artistry and artisanship and dedication to culture. It's wonderful. But everybody wants a piece of this Silk Road pie. So the lucrative 16th century Silk Road trades definitely interested Shah Abbas of the Iran's Safavid dynasty. He very cleverly wants to bring all silk production under strict imperial control. And Shah Abbas was a contemporary of Elizabeth I, Philip II of Spain, and Akbar of India. I think, I'm trying to remember who would have been the king in Russia. It escapes me now, but that's the time frame that he's in. I just love looking at these pictures, and can you imagine the music in the background and the flow of the wine and the food and the opulence and just the silks, resplendent. Apparently the boys didn't get the notice. Boys only wear blue or gray like here. I just love it when men wear colors. I think it's so beautiful. Anyway, so what he also does, he aligns his market with Europe for silk trading. And it's not just shrewd economically, it's shrewd politically, because he wants Europe as an ally against the Ottoman Turks. Now, the French jeweler, Jean-Pierre Tavernier, has documented a lot about Shah Abbas. And look at him in Persian resplendence. Gold is the color of opulence and authority during the time. And by the way, it's very telling that weaving was a very respected art form. Poets and the Shah Abbas himself really were skilled weavers, and they really prided themselves on their weaving skills. And the Safavids provided, for the most part, almost all the luxury textiles one knows. Of shiploads of them were going to India, to the Mughal Empire. And so luxury textiles over and over are emblems of power. And so they are also very effective billboards. This textile, this unique textile, is what's known as the prisoner scenes, because what they do is they depict, because they don't have photographs and billboards, what you wear is once again identity. Here they're depicting the Safavid wins and victories over the Georgians. And so you see them holding the prisoner, his hands tied behind his back. And you can imagine the little boy sitting in the back of the rider is also a prisoner. He's not there as a buddy. So anyway, so we see these, and these prisoner scenes are made into surcoats, which we see here in this painting. And it is really about bestowing honor. So when these coats are made, they're given as kila. It's called kila. And this is where the term, once again, Silk Road is everywhere, the term kila is the etymologically where we get, it influences the term that we use now, gala. So the red carpet concept, the gala concept, all comes ripple effects from the Silk Road. And they bestowed these magnificent ceremonial robes to secure loyalty and then also establish legitimacy. And we do that still. So for those who are golf fanatics, the Masters, when you win, you get a green jacket. The concepts are still around, they do not go away. And we have evidence of such ceremonial coats many places. So this is Robert Shirley. He was the ambassador, the British ambassador to, I'm trying to remember, 17th century. Look at his outfits, and he's with Berkeley Castle in England. And apparently when he entertained people, he used to wear all this. Can you imagine going to an English lord and he shows up in this? I thought it was fantastic. I want those coats. Look at the frill. He had style. And here is one more of his quote. When I see these, what I absolutely love is the marriage of cultures. Here is a Persian coat with the Chinese dragon depicted right into the design. It embodies humanity for me. I just think, I don't know. I like it when cultures seep in that you don't even know where it comes from. There's a great need for that nowadays, but it's also a need always. And the Persians weren't the only ones who knew how to use advertisement well. Politics affects textiles through and through. And so in the 14th century, Pope Clement V has been exiled and he ends up in Avignon, France. And his need for vestments don't grow away. And because he's in France now, France gets involved in the silk trade. Now, remember those prisoner scenes that we saw, those effective billboards? Well, the advertisement isn't just limited to the East. The church does branding magnificently. Don't you just want to glide into the cool waters of this velvet Mediterranean? I would love to wear this. Well, I would love to wear any of this. But if you look, the embroidery tells a story of the church, of fortification, of community. There is tons of money to be made by France from selling textiles because the French is not yet the fashion powerhouse that it is now. And predecessors to Louis do not like that all the French wealth is being poured into Italy. He wants to rein in that money. And so what happens, we go back to the map again. And it's a wonderful story which keeps repeating all the time. Politics, power, and money, the eternal menage a trois. We see in around the 15th century, the French King Charles VI, he holds an annual trade fair. And the merchants and the bankers from Florence flock to Lyon. And it is absolutely no accident that in the old quarters of Lyon, there are very characteristics of Florentine architecture. So remember those Florentine silk houses of Pucci? Well, silk culture starts in Lyon with the venture capital coming in. Well, they didn't use the term venture capital, but effectively it's venture capital coming in from the merchants of Florence. And the Lyon traders, because they're not making the silk, they're just trading, make huge profits exporting silk. There are lots of interesting twists in the silk trade in Lyon and France in the 15th century. If you have the time, read up on it. Some of the references are in the books. It's fascinating. Luxury textiles are a magnificent intrigue. Very soon over time, Lyon becomes the European silk powerhouse. And by the time Louis XIV, the Sun King, arrives, there is nothing to compare. And his Minister of Finance is very clever, has once again given tax incentives to lure Italian traders into Lyon. And he also, to establish dominance in the fashion industry, because by that time they were not dominant yet, he decrees that every year fashion will change and that France will set the standards. That is exactly what has been carried on by the haute couture. We used to hear of, all the fashion houses show up once a year. I think now with sustainability, they're trying to see if there are other ways of doing it. But this is when it was established. Fashion is not frivolous. It's a $1.5 trillion industry. Often people dismiss it. Oh, who cares about fashion? Lots of economics do. It's made huge impact on our lives. These are the Queen's chambers in Versailles. And I love the fact that reinterpretation is a form of preservation. Remember those silk tapestry, well, the silk hangings in the yurts of the Mongols? That is what influenced tapestry. That is where they got the idea of tapestry on the wall. So we now see in this magnificence, the tapestry are calling out, hearkening to the silk wall hangings that we know of first during the gifts given to Murad, or in the 10th century when they rolled out the red carpets for the Byzantine Empire. History repeats itself most beautifully. Well, the factories in Lyon that were set there still work now, although a lot of it is automated. And the painstaking labor that goes into creating silk scarf almost justifies the price of some of them. So one of the companies that uses the Lyon scarf is the Lyon factories is Hermes. And sometimes there are 46 layers of printing, individual block printing done by automation to create one silk scarf. It's really owning a work of art, or I guess wearing a work of art. Nice work if I can afford it. And into here comes that other fashion plate, Napoleon. Look at him, preening with power. He uses luxury textiles with cunningness to depict power during his coronation. Look at the sumptuousness of that velvet. I mean, right down to his silk white gloves embroidered in threads of gold. I mean, he's very clever. Can you imagine this Napoleon sitting in that thread? Remember, he's short. If he was wearing a shirt and a pant, do you really think he would embody power? Nothing of the sort. Textiles, luxury textiles, do wonders. It makes a huge difference. Look at the mastery of the work in this. The French artistry beams in clothes like this, in this embroidered jacket and waistcoat. Now, I cannot see the face of this wearer, but I'll bet he's wealthy and powerful, or at least aspires to be. Luxury textiles are an embodiment of power. The gifting of it, the wearing of it, the procurement of it across the board. It has been that from the beginning and will probably remain the same. And this is an actual order placed in the Lyon factories for Napoleon's uniform. This is actual written out order. And look at the mastery of that textile shoe. I'd wear that if I could. I always think so sustainable. It's made of cloth, not animals. So all the vegan lovers can wear shoes like this. I think it's beautiful. Not to be left behind, Napoleon's wife, Josephine, here she is showcasing her Indian-inspired dress. The Silk Road influence again, because the paisley pattern on the bottom of her dress is distinctly Indian. And there again is the allure of the Orient. And this came about, and we also see her wearing a shawl, something that I love, because through the French exploits in Egypt, the generals brought back shawls to give to their beloveds, and expensive shawls became a rage. Now, you know, the Madame de Pompadour and many of the known queens and rulers and the escorts of rulers in France and also in England, their wives had a lot. They were very astute economically, and they helped establish brands. Madame Pompadour, who was the official mistress of Louis XV, she backed and invested in Sèvres, the porcelain, and these have withstood the test of time. Josephine invested in the concept of the jacquard shawls, which is an automated way of creating shawls. It's an automation, it's a punch card technique created by Joseph Marie Jacquard. She invested in that or supported that idea, and looms were affected. Complex textiles like damasks were used to be made. And so you see shawls in many of the European paintings, because it's telling, right? This painting is called what? Not Woman with Parrot, it's Woman with the Shawl. There's a blue Kashmiri shawl with all the details in there. And again, in this painting of the Grand Staircase, up in the foreground, there is that magnificent green Kashmiri shawl. Because if you are going to be painted or photographed, don't you want to show off your refined best? Everyone will do the same. But it's not just limited to the shawls. I mean, jacquard is great, but actual Kashmiri shawls, they're a thing apart. They're the luxury of time because these are hand-stitched, magnificent work, unbelievably soft, and they're featherweight. You can fold them into the tiniest of forms. To me, they are swoon-worthy. And in the best of pashmina shawls, you shouldn't be able to tell the embroidery in the front or in the back. And the reason I'm showing the shawls is because shawls embody the idea of the Silk Road, because pashmina is not found in the actual pashmina isn't found in France. They come from the central region of the Silk Road, which is not even Kashmir. It's actually a mistake to call these things Kashmir, because really good pashmina comes from Mongolia. And so these adorable little creatures are what makes a lot of those Josephines and everybody else look wonderful. I love shawls, but I'd be happy to hug one of these cute little things. They're so beautiful. I think I'm looking at the time, since we're coming up on our time. As we move in the distance, perhaps in some other presentation, I will continue the story of the luxury textiles as it moves into the areas of India, China, and Japan. This is obviously Indian jacket made of Kashmiri pashmina shawls, jacket made of that. And to be wrapped in 9 yards of silk velvet, bejeweled resplendence. And this, many of you can recognize the eponymous chintz prints. They were influenced by the colonization of Britain in India, and the vibrant colors of the silk pattern shows up very easily in the carpets by William Morris, he who is the face of the arts and craft movement. And from India, we will move on to the story of the kimonos in Japan. This is when I'll start salivating also, almost right up there with the, what we talk about, muge, the Turkish delights. These make me salivate as well. These kimonos, they are things to be treasured. And what I really emphasize, what I hope it comes across, heritage, the very rare and important art, it's a dying art of fingernail weavings to create obis, the belts that wrap around a kimono. I mean, look at the man, look at his fingernails. He uses his fingernails etched perfectly to weave the patterns on an obi. Look at the mind that puts this amount of refinement into just a belt. And then we'll move on to China. I mean, the colors matter in China. Yellow is the color of the imperial. What does it mean when the Empress, Dowager Empress, wore a coat that was yellow? Lots of political history just in the color. And if you look at the symbolism and the motifs in the dragon robe, we see in the bottom the bewildering shapes, and we see somewhat recognize the cloud patterns. Well, what are these squiggly lines? They aren't imaginative, they are real. They are the Rainbow Mountains in China. Oh. The world is a magnificent thing. And I just love that I'm able to share it with people. Anybody in the IWA shares this passion. And if you like stories like this, the Nourishment Project has a presentation every month. It happens to, this month happens to be tomorrow at 4 o'clock. The story tomorrow is a bed, the layers. And if you're interested, please check our workout in the nourishmentprojects.com. It's plural. And as I had said early when we were starting, that I will be doing, it's hosted by the WAC, a series, a 7-month series on gardens. It is going to go month by month on different gardens around the world. That there are differences in the concept of the garden, you know, French garden, Japanese garden, English garden, Islamic garden, urban garden. But no matter which it is, the thread that connects all gardens is this idea of control. It is controlling or putting into form nature. Effectively, you're trying to control beauty. There is an entirely different relevance and mind that appreciates a forest. So the final one is going to be on a forest. Because whatever it may be, a forest, a real forest, is never controlled. It has no interest in us. It grows to its own music. And so a mind that appreciates a forest instantly reveals it is not about control. It's about belonging to something much higher, much bigger than us. And so in each of the month, there are standalone items, but I think the story makes much more sense when you see it in its entirety. So for example, the French gardens, the precision and the form that is found on Louis XIV court is reflected in his Baroque gardens, absolutely pruned, manicured to perfection, his boxwoods. That same level of precision shows up in a Japanese garden, the relentless pursuit of perfection. However, the Japanese approach to garden is strikingly different from that of the French, and the French gardens are stunning. The Japanese garden is more a beauty of contemplation. To them, I think the highest art is the beauty of contemplation. And so the Japanese garden is there at some point to evoke introspection. So each garden has a different reason. The Islamic gardens pivots around water, that which is highest in the concepts of Islam. So all the gardens pivot around water and the fruit orchard. I'm very thrilled to be working on this. And if you like those, please consider signing up for the Nourishment Projects. I would be delighted to see you there. I'm going to stop. I really hope you saw things in here that brought some joy, because that's the whole point of doing this. Thank you so much. Are there any questions? I hope I didn't take too much time. No, it was 1 hour.
No, no, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. If
Oh,
you
you're
want to
welcome.
unmute yourselves, then you can ask questions.
I don't have a question, but I want to just thank Soma again. What a beautiful program. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's very
Yeah.
heartfelt. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Muge, thank you for being up so late. I hope I didn't keep you up too much.
No, absolutely not. I enjoyed it. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Yes.
I had a question. How do you do all your research? Do you travel a lot and pick things up as you go along, like in Paris? And
I used to travel like we all did. So my anniversary, this is more than anybody needs to know. Our anniversary is in July, and the only gift I ever like is traveling. So once a year, we take an annual vacation. So every year we go to a different country. And when I go, the two things that I always run to are libraries and gardens. So last year we were in London and France. So one of the gardens I drove off to was Sissinghurst Castle. It's just beautiful, the moon gardens. It's great. So what it does to me, it's not that I take notes. And you know, I went to the Bodleian Library and the Cambridge Library. They're all gorgeous, Ashmolean. I just go and sit and see them. And I hardly buy anything. I just like to keep my eyes open and see what it is. And then when I come back, I research and I learn about it. And so libraries are my friends. Wherever you see me, if there's a room with books, you'll probably find me there. So I love the research part of it. And the collaborators for the Nourishment Project is our main libraries, the Oriental Institute, the library at the Deering Library, the Lenhard Library, so the Northwestern Library, the Library of the Botanical Gardens. So for the upcoming gardens, the books were suggested to me by the head librarian at the Lenhard Library, which is at the Chicago Botanic Gardens. So I try to make sure that, you know, these are not opinion pieces. That's why I give some of the references up front. If it encourages someone to go and research it, that's the best thing. Therein lies the peer-to-peer. I know very little, but I try to expose what I know to you, take it and expand it. The world is beguiling. I hope I answered your question, Nicola.
yes, you certainly did.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Roya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was
Thank you.
great. I had a question though. What is tiraz again? Tiraz?
Oh, tiraz is the border that you saw in many of the textiles. It's not just the border. So if you remember the Veil of Saint Anne, it's part of the decoration. You will see them in almost all Islamic textiles, even the ones from areas of Egypt. They have the writing on the textile itself. It looks like beautiful artwork, but it's Islamic calligraphy.
Yeah, so it's referred to the border as a name, or it's the writing style?
The writing itself, the way they show up in the bands in the cloth. So, okay, so I call it border because of the mantle of the Holy Roman Empire. But if you see Mecca, the Kaaba, they have a cloth that goes over the Kaaba. So in the middle of the Kaaba, the tiraz is the gold writing that surrounds the Kaaba. So every year, whoever gets to adorn the Kaaba, it's a sign of honor. So they make the Kaaba, it's a huge black velvet piece with the writings of Islam wrapping around that black cloth. So that writing is known as the tiraz. So it's not just the border of the item, it's that Islamic calligraphy writing that shows up in the textile itself. Yes, Mary Louise.
I wonder if I heard this correctly.
Yes, please.
Did you say that once man is exposed to luxury, he prefers it. When you were speaking of clothing early on in your talk, did you say that?
I have
Because
said that. That's an opinion. That's my
okay,
opinion.
that's fine. But I have a broader question.
Yes,
What do you suppose we can do to expose man to luxury today? Because clearly we look like we just stepped out of a washing machine everywhere.
Don't you think so? I think it's a shame. You know,
Terrible.
I truly believe it's terrible. My poor son, I deck him out now. He's only 9. I'm sure he might rebel, or actually it frightens me. I see him dress up in the morning and run in front of a mirror and say, I look good. That frightens me to no ends. I'm like, what is he doing? But the reason I say that, you know, you historically, even when you see Jefferson, stalwarts of American patriotism, they didn't dress like bums. They cared deeply of what they were doing. But I think it requires, in my humble opinion, Mary Louise, an educated mind to be exposed to that. If you're surrounded by, you know, anything goes, if you see, this is not a criticism, but an observation. When you see the head of billion-dollar firms walking around in jeans and a t-shirt, there are other ways to show that you're down to earth without dressing like a bum. You don't respect anyone. I am not suggesting one must wear, you know, Xenia every moment, but you could take the time to care and wear something nice and put the effort in. I would be thrilled if I knew that when my son, if ever he gets married, he's only 9, so he's got a while to go, that he cared, that he wanted, you know, pink pearl buttons for his tuxedo. Fantastic. Why should you deny yourself beauty? And why should you deny me looking at something beautiful? I think putting the humanities back in the school is essential. If you're just, and I'm an engineer, if all you're going to push is analytical thinking, there is no refinement in that. But even that is telling. Einstein was a brilliant violinist. They had a very nice marriage in their education. Now we all genuflect in this concept of studying science. It's going to set us not in the best of ways. Does that make sense, Mary Louise?
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Yes. Any other questions from anyone?
Do you mean they don't have humanities anymore in the schools?
No.
Very little.
Very little. Several, they do have humanities, but it's skimmed across.
Surface, yeah.
If at all, because with limited budgets, and the humanities are not just reading Shakespeare. I mean, that's not my idea of humanity. Languages are cut out, music is cut out, all of this is cut out, and then we complain, you know, people are not empathetic. I cannot imagine people developing empathy doing mathematical equations. I like math, it gives me discipline, but that is not the area for empathy. Reading books is empathy, because you can really relate to another character, and that's, you develop empathy naturally. Seeing the arts. When I see paintings by people like Van der Weyden, his paintings just reflect emotions. They look totally different from the 2-dimensional paintings that came from before. I mean, it works seamlessly in the mysteries, but you have to be exposed to it. I challenge anyone to sit there in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, even when the Civic Symphony is playing, to listen to music wordless and not react to it with gushing emotions. That is what is needed. We are lucky to have the internet. We have access to all of this. If I wanted to listen to Saint-Saëns or symphony, I don't know, organ symphony, I can. But unless I know it exists, I'm not going to. All I'm going to look up is, what is Kim Kardashian wearing? I don't, by the way. But that's all we'll know to do.
Geography is not being learned the same way, I feel like, and that's such an important part of the world. But
yes, essential.
Well, thank you for a fabulous, outstanding presentation. It's
Yes.
amazing.
Yes,
Looking forward to the next one.
Yes, thank you so much.
We are very lucky to have you, Shoma. So thank you so much.
It's a privilege for me.
yeah.
Bye, Suzanne. Nice. Thank you everyone for your time. I hope you have.
You're so inspiring to listen to.
Oh,
Every
thank
time.
you. It's the accent. I fool you.
No.
You wish.
All right. Please take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, girls.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.